Hello, and welcome back. Today we're going to learn how to multiply integers. Before we get into our work, let's review a couple of key ideas from previous lessons. Integers are a group of numbers that include all the whole numbers and their opposites. A number's blank blank is its distance from zero. So a number's absolute value is its distance from zero. Two blanks have the same blank blank because they are the same distance from zero but on opposite sides of zero. So two opposites have the same absolute value because they are the same distance from zero but on opposite sides of zero. Another word for opposites is additive inverse. Today you'll be able to find the product of positive and negative numbers. You want to think about how do the signs of the factors impact the sign of the product. When we first learned about multiplication in elementary school, we learned that multiplication was just repeated what? Repeated addition. So we're going to use that idea of repeated addition to help us understand how we multiply with positive and negative numbers. The first example is done for you. This is negative 11 added together 3 times. So we know that negative 11 plus another negative 11 would make negative 22, plus another negative 11 would make negative 33. If we wrote this out as addition, we would say we have 3 groups of negative 11. So 1, 2, 3, 3 groups of negative 11. And that also equals negative 33. In the next example, we have negative 9 plus negative 9, so that's negative 18. Plus another negative 9 would be negative 27. Plus another negative 9 would be negative 36. Plus another negative 9 would be negative 45. To write this as multiplication, I have 1, 2, 5 groups of negative 9. And 5 times negative 9 is negative 45. Next we have negative 1 plus negative 1, which is negative 2, plus negative 1, that's negative 3, plus negative 1, that's negative 4. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 4 groups of negative 1. So 4 groups of negative 1. There's your 4 groups of negative 1. That equals negative 4. Next we have negative 6 plus negative 6 plus negative 6 plus negative 6 plus negative 6. So these two make negative 12, negative 18, negative 24, negative 30. So we have 5 groups of negative 6. Notice I didn't use the dot there, that's okay. When you put a number next to a parenthesis like that, it means multiplication. So 5 groups of negative 6, there's my 5 groups of negative 6, equals negative 30. Right now you might be noticing something about multiplying with positive and negative numbers. So let's see if that holds true as we continue to look at a number line. We're going to move away from repeated addition and now model what these problems look like on a number line. It says model 5 times negative 2 using the number line. Show 5 groups of negative 2. So start at 0, one group of -2, two groups, 3, 4, and 5. Where it ends is our product. So 5 times -2 is -10. 4 times -3 using the number line, so we're going to show 4 groups of -3. So there's one group of -3, second group, your third, and your fourth. So we've got 4 times -3 is -12. And remember that when the number is right next to the parenthesis like that, it means multiplication. And when we first learned about multiplication, we learned that multiplication was commutative, meaning that you can multiply in any order and not change the product. So with positive numbers, we know that 5 times 4 is 20, and we know that 4 times 5 is also 20. So the same is true with negative numbers. If we know that 5 times -4 is -20, then the same logic applies. -4 times 5 is -20. It doesn't matter if the negative number goes first or second. The product is going to be the same no matter what. So by now I hope that you've noticed something. How do we multiply with positive and negative numbers? You might be thinking that you just multiply like normal and then make the answer negative. If you challenge yourself to use the term absolute value, I'd like you to just write down what you think happens when we multiply with a positive and a negative number. Try to use the phrase absolute value. And then there are these 9 problems that I'd like you to answer on your own. Don't use a calculator to answer these. Use any space that you need here or down at the bottom if you need to show any work. And then this is one of the 2 things that I'll be looking for in a finished packet. So press the pause button and then resume the video when you're done with these 9 problems. Next, we're going to model what happens when we multiply with 2 negative numbers. And we're going to use this idea of a number line and opposites to help us make sense of it. I'm going to zoom in on this number line here. Okay, so here's our original problem. Our original problem is -3 times -10. If we block out this negative sign here, we know how to find 3 times -10. So this is what 3 times -10 looks like. It's 3 groups of -10, and that equals -30. But that's not what we were asked. We were asked to find -3 times -10. So -3 times -10 is just going to be the opposite of whatever 3 times -10 was. So this symbol in front of the 3 acts like an opposite sign. So it's going to be the opposite of whatever 3 times -10 was. So 3 times -10 was -30. The opposite of that is on the opposite end of the number line at +30. So -3 times -10 is +30. So on the left-hand side, this is what it looks like when we multiply 3 times -10. This is 3 groups of -10. When we have a -3 times a -10, we go to the opposite end of the number line. So think of this as like the opposite of 3 times -10. Think of this symbol as like the opposite of 3 times -10. If we know what 3 times -10 is, -3 times -10 is going to be on the opposite side at +30. So because +3 and -3 are opposites, it makes sense that the products are going to be opposites too. Let's practice doing that on a couple of number lines. So -4 times the -2. So if it was +4 times the -2, I would go this way. I would go 4 of -2. So that's one group, two groups, three groups, four groups. So that would be my answer. Crossing this out. This was a mistake. So that's four groups of -2. But my question was -4 times -2. So this is going to be the opposite answer. To +8. -3 times -3. So first I'm going to show what 3 times -3 looks like. So there's one -3, there's two -3s, there's three -3s. But this is -3 times -3. So instead of it being -9, it's going to be +9. So -3 times -3, +9. -5 times -3. So first I'm going to show what 5 times the -3 looks like. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 times -3, we know it's -15. But I'm asked what's -5 times -3. So that's going to be the opposite answer. So -5 times -3 is 15. All right. On this last page, we're going to look for a pattern in this table on the left-hand side. And then what you're going to do is to put this into words about how you multiply a negative and a negative. And you're going to find these products here. So let's look at finding a pattern. So we know that 5 times a -30 is a -150. And 4 times a -30 is a -120. 3 times a -30, 2 times a -30, right now, well, before we get there, we know that 0 times anything is 0. So you might notice something is happening, right? These numbers are all going up by 30. So if it goes like this down to 0, what do you think this next number is going to be? Well, if they keep going up by 30, the next number should be +30. And then +60. +90. +120 and +150. So notice how we have the opposites almost like on a number line. We have 60 and -60, 30 and -30. It's kind of like a mirror image of each other. But what I'm focusing on is the fact that when we multiplied with a negative and a negative, we got a positive product. So a negative times a negative gave us a positive product. So here's where you're going to put that into your own words. You're going to write down what did you notice. You're going to talk about how do we multiply a negative and another negative number together and try to use the phrase absolute value. And then come down here to these 8 problems and find these 8 problems without using a calculator. And then show me that your packet is finished and I'll get you to the next step.